It's a real pleasure to be here. As Catherine said, I feel like I'm part of the family. I am on the board of the Baltimore Lab School. This is my second presentation here for the Washington Lab School. I think the first was to a group of teachers. So this is the first time I think I've presented to a broader audience. Raise your hand if you're a parent here. That's your role, okay? Raise your hand if you're a teacher. All right, great, thank you. That's helpful. I want to recognize before I go any further and talk about the Neuro-Education Initiative, Dr. Martha Denkla, who is absolutely my hero. Martha and I have co-published together. She wrote the foreword to my second book, and she is a giant in the field of neuroeducation. Martha, could you just let everybody know who you are? She's on your board. I think many of you already know Martha Denkla, but Martha's absolutely my hero in the world of neuroeducation. And the whole idea was to bring together educators and scientists to say, what is it that we know about learning? And how do we make that inform what we do in the classrooms every day? So when I first got to Hopkins after my career, as Catherine said, with Baltimore City Schools, it was like Candyland because I had already published my first book and the brain-targeted teaching model was already getting moving, and we were doing presentations, myself and my teachers around the country. And so the dean at the time said, well, you know, you're interested in this. Why don't you take it to the next step? So I found Martha and a few other really smart, amazing neuroscientists who really understood the idea that neuroscience should be informing what we do in education, and that neuroeducation of all the neuro fields, neuroaesthetics, neuroeconomics, neurolaw, of all those fields, the one that's the most important is teachers understanding how children think and learn. And so we have been lucky to have great collaboration from all of those units at Johns Hopkins, culminating in the neuroeducation's work, which initially started out to be mostly conferences, and then we moved on to conferences are great, but even deeper is doctoral master's programs, and that is like the most robust programs now at Johns Hopkins are the mind-brain teaching certificates. And the research we're doing, I hope you'll like we're seeing tonight. So it's been a robust program that continues and will hopefully continue on. So one of my early collaborators, as well as Martha, is Dr. Charles Lim, and we'll be talking about Charles a little later when we talk about creativity. Charles is an MD, otolaryngologist at Johns Hopkins and now at UC Berkeley. Sorry to lose him, but he's still a collaborator with us. And he is known for his work on, well, again, he does straight up surgery, cochlear implants, you name it. But he also is a researcher who is a jazz musician, and he did some of the first studies in looking at the neurocorrelates of creativity by looking at improvisation versus learned music. And, you know, his work is amazing. If you don't know it, you would love it. He's got TED Talks and YouTubes. The study that we like to reference is This Is Your Brain on Jazz. So really cool stuff. And he went from jazz into then looking at rap musicians and found very similar results in terms of how the brain processes creativity through the arts. Pretty cool. Oh, that's me as a school principal. And I'll talk a little bit about that because that's really where my work began, is really in the field. They talk about, you know, so many times research goes from these big research universities, and Johns Hopkins, as you know, is one, into the field, and we try to tell practitioners what they should do, and then we go all mad when they don't do our work. You know, the whole research to practice stuff is like, why don't teachers really do all the good stuff that we're doing in our research labs? And I think that's a really bad way of looking at it. I'm trying to change that at Hopkins because it's really all about what do practitioners need And what research should we be doing that bubbles up from practice? That's the most important part of research. So that's what you're going to see tonight. Okay, so I want to talk about creativity for a minute because, you know, the arts and creativity this is a really big topic right now in the world of education. And we're going to be visiting this a little bit later, but I want to put this on your radar screen now. And that is, so what is creativity and what does it look like? And so that's what we're going to be talking about, the research of creativity in the arts. And then I'm going to show you school-based studies where we actually compared STEM to STEAM, right? You know what I mean? Anybody not know what I mean? Okay. And then what that means for just very globally, creative thinking and problem solving for all students. Before I start, it is really important that I make sure everybody understands what I'm talking about when I say my own work. So in my school, I saw arts in 3 different ways, and that all 3 ways were equally important. One is that arts educators have to be in the school, and children should have direct access to arts education, right? Nothing replaces that. That art teacher, that music teacher, drama, whatever you can afford to have, and unfortunately fewer and fewer schools can really afford that. Next is the arts and cultural experiences, and here in DC you're so lucky. Baltimore we are too, and many schools are lucky to have access to cultural experiences and arts and residency programs. My work and what I want to talk about and what is the cornerstone really of the lab school is arts integration. That is how the arts are integrated into content instruction to enhance learning for students. And what we'll talk about tonight is how that is really helpful to all students, but really important for students who struggle to learn in traditional ways. And I'm going to show you how our research really supports that arts integration is really important. So more than anything else, for those of you who are working in this field and the parents who bought into coming to this school, I don't know if I'm going to tell you anything that you don't already believe, but what I hope to do is show you research that will make you say, check the box. I mean, now I know why I'm here, and now I know why I believe this. Okay, so when I became a principal at Roland Park Public School in Baltimore City, one of the largest schools in the city, it was plagued by a lot of problems. Sits in a pretty upscale neighborhood, but when I got there, the neighborhood was petitioning to get rid of it because it was really not in good shape. And those were all the problems I had, including declining test scores. And guess what? You do not survive as a public school if your test scores are declining. You are on a watch list, which our school was. So guess what I had to do? I had to look at what we were required by the federal laws and focus on having children fill in the right bubble. So we got real good at that and got award after award, lots of money. We rocked it. One of the top schools in the state, yay. However, I started to look at my own school and schools across the country, and I realized that there were many unintended consequences of high-stakes accountability testing and focusing on getting kids prepared for that kind of testing. And that was the depletion of subjects across the country. I still read articles. I read 2 just today about how the arts are leaving schools because of budget cuts and largely because reading and math scores roll. But it's not just reading, it's not just the arts, science, social studies. I mean, a lot of subjects have taken a back seat because of focus on accountability. So I started to feel like my school looked like this, like 50s, you know, ooh, we weren't looking very creative anymore. And so I started thinking about, so where can I find research and what would make this school feel better again? And, you know, I started looking at the neurocognitive sciences and seeing about what is it and how are children learning? What do we know about how children learn? that goes well beyond a reading and a math score. So we all know now that there's a big push for creativity. The Partnership for 21st Century Schools focuses on those big areas. It's kind of become synonymous with innovation and creativity, right? That partnership. And there are a lot of areas that they focus on, but creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication is a big part of that. So what I started to see was a big mismatch with what we were doing in schools and what the people wanted out there in our community, what businesses wanted. They wanted workers who were capable of being creative thinkers and problem solving. And how's that going to happen if we train kids to find the one answer out of 4? No. So these are the skills. Again, so what are the employers saying about how well we're doing with this? Not very well. Look at those headlines. We can look at any one of them. Why are so many college students failing to gain job skills before graduation? 40% of college grads lack skills necessary for the workforce. So what is wrong? Why are the people in the workforce saying that as hard as we're focusing on reading and math skills and high stakes accountability, why is that not working? And I would probably say it's because we're focusing on content and skill acquisition versus creativity and problem solving. And so I started listening to the kids and the teachers. What are they talking about in terms of school? And I heard that over and over again from my kids and from kids I talked to in other schools. They just like learning through the arts. And then I started listening to the teachers, and I was really shocked to hear something. And they gave me a lot of anecdotes. And that is, when I taught an arts integrated unit, my kids seemed to come back and remember that unit better than anything else I taught during the year. That when they taught through arts integration, kids seemed to remember information better. So this is when I was still a principal, and it really made me start to think, because I got my doctorate at that time, and I was really into randomized controlled trials, and let's see how we can test that. So I started looking at the research. What are the researchers saying? And I found, guess what? Arts integration is linked to achievement in reading mathematics. There are a lot of citations there. Correlational studies, but they found that they were linked. Next, we found a lot of studies, and these were really even more powerful, that arts integration helped student engagement and learning. Now again, when I talk about arts integration, I am not talking about arts education, I'm talking about arts used as a pedagogical tool to teach non-art subjects, right? That's what we talk about here. Then we looked at different populations, and we found that low SES populations were really achieving differentially. And we looked at motivation. We saw, again, engagement, test scores. So the research kept really showing us some good things. So then I looked at neuroscience, and I started thinking more about memory and what the teachers were saying to me about kids remembering information more. And I'm a big disciple of this guy, Eric Kandel, who got the Nobel Prize for understanding how working memory and information moving from working memory to long-term memory actually creates new proteins in the brain. And when he talks to educators, he calls them neuroplasticians. Because he says when you bring information from short to long-term memory, you are actually changing brain chemistry. How powerful is that? So what is it that we can do to bring kids to long-term memory and not have them learning the same information over and over again or forgetting something 3 months later because they've crammed to pass the test and now they don't remember much of what they learned? Then we look to the cognitive and psychological sciences. Now, my team wrote a position paper, a theoretical framework for arts integration, and we looked at these memory effects. If you rehearse and elaborate and generate and enact information, if you produce it, if you have effort after meaning, that means you struggle a little bit. If you have emotional arousal or picture superiority, here they are again for you with all the citations. We thought, taken together, these memory effects, all research not in arts integration, not with students, but taken together, wow, these all would be recruited through the arts. So here's some examples. Rehearsal. So music, rhyme, meter helps form chunks and makes rehearsal easier. The elaboration effect, creating stories, pictures, nonverbal expressions. Generation effect, actually generating information. So artistic activities really require kids to generate information. Enactment effect, the idea of enacting something out, which is so perfect in theater programs, produce much greater memory than simply reading about something. Production, again, very tightly mapped to dramatic activities, singing, theater. Effort after meaning, struggling to think about what something is, as in a visual art picture and thinking about it. And then, it's fundamental to art interpretation. Picture superiority, obviously a picture is worth 1,000 words. Emotional enhancement, we know that the arts absolutely evoke emotion, probably more than anything else. And so here's an example, children looking at Lutz's painting, Washington crossing the Delaware and trying to figure out, what's the light about? Could George Washington really be standing there, not falling over? What's the physics behind that? And then thinking about the activities that they could do just from having examined that painting, from writing a story. Here underneath are the memory effects that would recruit, interpreting the painting, doing a dramatic re-enhancement, painting a portrait. All right, so here's a second grader who did just that. Now, you think about what you know and what you learn, what you remember. I still remember the flora and fauna of Australia because some teacher made me do a poster. And I did that kicking and screaming because that was not the way I like to learn. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so here's a picture. George Washington. What would that child remember after doing that? He has a frown on George Washington because the Battle of Trenton was done on Christmas night. He missed his family. So he'll remember forever when that happened. Then on the left, he's got the soldier smiling because he remembers it was a surprise attack. Aha, the Hessian soldiers don't know we're coming. And then the other soldier smiling because guess what? We won the Battle of Trenton. On the other side, they're sagging. They're just cold. But again, that kind of thing would recruit a lot of memories, right? When you think about a child 5 years later saying, oh yeah, I remember doing that. I remember why I painted that and remember the details of that event. So our theory was that the arts do provide ample opportunity to rehearse and elaborate on information for arts integration. And the benefits are long-term retention, attention and motivation, and according to our Harvard colleagues with at Project Zero, there are certain thinking dispositions such as persistence to task and reflection that the arts engender. So, big question. Sounds good, Hardiman. How do you really know? And the answer is, all the studies I talked to you about are correlational. That is, the arts correlate to better achievement. However, there are many people from the government to researchers to policymakers to those in charge of schools who don't believe the research unless it's done by randomized controlled trials. That is, children are it's the gold standard of research, right? Children are randomized, you have pre-post groups, and so we did that at Hopkins. We could not find, we still can't find randomized controlled trials that have been done in arts integration. We've done 2 already, we're getting ready to do our 3rd. So our first was a preliminary study in 4 classrooms, about 100 kids, and then 16 classrooms. This was all done in Baltimore City schools. So we wrote STEAM and STEM units, and we matched them. And they were matched for content, obviously. They had to have the same content. Timing the activity, we wanted to make sure that in the traditional instruction, which was the STEAM units, that the same content was being taught in the same amount of time. In other words, if you spent 2.5 days learning about the states of matter in chemistry and arts integration and 20 minutes in the control condition, you couldn't compare them, right? So we were really careful about dosage. And then finally, mode of presentation, which was very hard to do. But if children were singing the song, we made sure that in the other group, they were doing something active in learning, because we didn't want anyone to say, oh, well, your arts integration was just active learning, and your other was passive learning, so you really weren't looking at the art. So we made sure that it was active learning too. In the control, and here are some examples, like for example, presentation in the control was a performance and treatment, writing and control was drawing and treatment, choral reading and control was singing and treatment. So that gives you an idea about what kind of activities we did in the arts integrated units. We used all forms, so this chart shows you the breakdown of the different forms of art. A lot of it was visual arts, as you can see, but that usually meant we did a lot of visual vocabulary. Every day they had to expand on their vocabulary by drawing pictures of how the vocabulary concept meant to them. So because that was a daily activity, it was a little more skewed to visual, but we used all the arts activities. Here's how the study was designed. Let's look at teacher 1 on the very left there. Teacher 1 taught astronomy, and she taught it first to the red group, who were a randomized group of kids in the arts integrated condition. And then she taught astronomy after the first unit, which was 15 lessons, about a month or so. Then she taught the second unit in astronomy in the non-arts integrated condition. We had observers making sure that treatment and control didn't bleed into each other about 60% of the time. So it was a pretty controlled study. So this same group, for example, of kids in the red group, randomized group, then got a non-arts integrated condition in a different content area. So everybody had either arts integrated first or second, and one subject or the next. So here's some pictures. Here's a group of children showing solid molecules, and they're doing something called tableau, where they were told you can do anything you want to show how water molecules act. And they decided to pack themselves together tightly, because that's how solid, I said water before, that's how solid molecules act. This is one of my favorite pictures in the whole wide world. These little guys probably don't get along all the time, but look at them here. It's the power of the arts. They are holding hands, moving out to show that water molecules are not so tightly packed. And then here are my lovely students doing dance poses to show that gas molecules are even further. In astronomy, this is a child who storyboarded, I think it's called what? Seymour the Star, and how stars become stars in a storyboard. Here are kids who are showing their bodies to show the shapes of the galaxies. This is a robot life science. They're showing the various systems of the body in a robot puppet. And then here's a visual arts of looking at the difference between animal and plant cells. So these are things you see all your kids doing all the time because of the way this school is structured and has been for many, many years. But this is just what we did in our study. So we did a lot of measures, but the one I want to talk about the most is our pre, post, and delayed content testing. So we were testing students. Our objective was, getting back to it, is arts integration as good as or better than regular instruction for long-term retention? That's what we focused on. Now, you may wonder why we were wondering if it was as good as. Here's why. Many teachers would push back, even teachers who loved teaching through the arts, but they would say, nope, can't do it because I have to teach my AP biology course and I will never get all that content done in the same amount of time if I incorporate the arts. So we were wondering that, you know, if we found that integrating arts into content produces the same memory, then this is really a strong finding because there's so many other residual benefits of the arts, like I talked about before: thinking dispositions, persistence to task, engagement, enjoyment, fun. So we felt, you know, we're just testing memory because this is an important construct in learning. If you can't remember something, you can't ever apply it meaningfully, right? So memory is important to learning. So we thought, okay, so if it's as good as, then there's other things that they're getting. But it could be better than. So let's find that out. And that's what we were testing. So in our first study, ta-da! This is the findings, and this is from post-test to delayed testing. So this is how much students remembered of what they learned, right? We did pre-test. The kids were the same on pre-test between treatment and control. We then tested them right after the units were done. That's a post-test. And then delayed testing, it was about 2 months later. So kids remembered by and large information better when they took the arts. And then we started looking at what does this matter in terms of who we're looking at. And this is really important for the population of students that attend the lab school. So this is the control condition, which means that's traditional instruction. And here are students who function at the basic levels of reading and math. In other words, they struggle with traditional ways of learning. So they learned less to begin with and remembered much less than their peers who were at the intermediate and advanced level in traditional instruction. This reverses in arts integration. Yeah, in arts integration, kids at the lower levels did learn less to begin with, but remembered more of what they learned. Now, why is that happening? Well, we think it's happening, at least we thought with our first study, it's probably happening because it gives kids different ways to express what they know, right? Gives them different venues for not only learning, but also expressing. And here's a chart that shows that in a different way. Treatment and control right there. They start out at about the same levels. After the teaching, they were exactly at the same levels. But you can see the decay in memory is much less for the arts integrated condition, which is here in green, than the control condition. So this is in one of our academic papers in the journal Mind, Brain, and Education, the effects of arts integration on long-term retention of academic content. So after that study, we got a grant from the U.S. Department of Education to continue it, and we did. And here we had a much larger sample. Ta-da! Now, here, this is really interesting to me. So what we decided to do here in this group was to break it down not just by 3 levels, not 2. Keep looking at the basic, but then also look at kids who are proficient and then kids who were advanced. And what we saw was really interesting. Same thing, arts integration is red. The kids who are really benefiting the most from control to treatment, the biggest jump is in children who struggle with traditional instruction. It helps kids who are proficient. It does not help advanced kids. In fact, advanced kids actually do better in the control condition. Not much better, but they do better. And it's close enough that you could say that they do about the same. In fact, statistically, we say that we met our objective. They did as well as, but not better than. But this group really did better than. Now, does that make sense? To me, it does. If you're a really good learner, if you're really advanced in learning through traditional ways of teaching, it doesn't matter how you learn, you're going to learn it. But children who learn differently, who need different modes of expression in order to learn, like many children who are learning disabled or ELL, or just different learners, seem to benefit across both of our studies the most with arts integration. Here's a finding that we never expected. So everybody does better the second time around. But what is really interesting is that look at the purple group. This group of kids had control first. So they learned traditionally first. And then they learn through arts integration. So they do way better when they learn through arts integration. But look at the kids who had arts integration first. They do really well in control. So we found it not only here, but there was one other thing that I don't have in this study that makes us wonder about this. And this is what we're wondering. If kids had arts integration first, are they then taking that knowledge and applying it even when they are not being taught through the arts? Are our colleagues at Harvard right? And they say that the arts actually help kids with thinking dispositions that they apply in other subjects. So the only other, so this is, we didn't test this, so we can't say this for sure, but it makes us at least start to wonder. The other thing that makes us start to wonder is the one school that had the most number of advanced kids, we saw no difference at all through treatment and control. So two things were going on with that school. One was that they had a large number of advanced kids who were going to learn any kind of way at all. But the other thing is that they had been arts integrated for 8 years. So we're thinking, oh my gosh, these kids, I mean, it didn't matter. They may have been applying what they learned through arts integration across the board, always. We don't know. So I can't go back to that school anymore. That was my former school. So again, coming back to it, we focus so much on what is on the left side of that screen, but what's important to employers is on the right side of that screen: vision, imagination, creativity, and innovation. And it is our contention that that happens the best when children are taught through the arts. And so let's talk about creativity as we end. Can it be taught? Well, if you can't see what that says, just a darn minute, yesterday you said X equals 2. So you think about kids always thinking about picking one answer out of 4 to measure what they know, rather than developing an artist portfolio to show what they know. So makes us think a little bit about creativity. What is it? What does it do? So here's one definition: the interaction among aptitude, process, and environment by which an individual or group produces a perceptible product that's novel and useful. So those are the 2 things. Creativity, it's novel, it's useful. So we started looking at creativity, and some of the things that we looked at is that it is pliable. It's not fixed. All students could be taught in ways that foster creative thinking. And that really intelligence and creativity, while we kind of think about Einstein and others who are really brilliant people and they're creative and think that creativity only belongs to those with high IQs, what we're learning is that that's not true. They're two different constructs. So this means that maybe all students can demonstrate creative thinking. And that happens most when they're encouraged to find connections between concepts, solutions, varied solutions, and to apply the concepts to novel situations. How does that happen if not through the arts? Now, the other thing that we think is important here, and it gets back to why we focus on the importance of memory and how the arts improve memory, is I'm going to go back to the quote from Ulrich, who talks about creativity, and he's saying, fresh solutions, which is creativity, results from disassembling and reassembling the building blocks in an infinite number of ways. But that means the problem solver must thoroughly understand the blocks. So what that means is you can't be creative about something you know nothing about. I cannot be a creative surgeon because I don't know how to do surgery. And I would say that people maybe don't know how to be a creative educator if they were brought up in a different profession. Although, I don't know, most people think that they know all that there is to know about education. So we call this adaptive expertise, and that occurs when students acquire knowledge, they're learning it, but then they're engaging in the problem-solving process, and they can adapt to new situations. So that comes back again, I'm going to say it a different way, requires content knowledge within a different domain, and then the ability to use that knowledge in creative ways. So we think about creativity as being both domain specific, that is, it's within a content area, like I could be really creative in my science class, or I'm really creative in writing, but maybe not in science. Or it can be domain general, and that is that we learn certain skills that apply to all aspects of learning. And it's really what we're finding now, and some of the researchers are saying in newest writings, is that it's both. So there you go. The magic synthesis of convergent and divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is that there's only one answer to a problem, whereas divergent, there are many different ways to solve a problem, and no one way is the right way. Again, think about the arts. Think about students who learn differently, and think about the idea that if they can solve problems in ways that best help them in their own ways of learning, that they can demonstrate their knowledge in ways that they could not under traditional instruction. So let's look at the nitty-gritty of what this looks like, because we talked about that earlier. So here are some things. Domain-specific knowledge we just talked about. And then steps for retention, which probably the teachers would be interested in knowing, looking at big picture concepts, retrieving information, prompting them, evaluating, arts integration, delivering content, and multiple times through multiple modalities. Another is open-ended prompts to encourage unique responses. Another are to pose questions with more than one correct response. Alternative solutions. Another, what are the implications of each solution? Forecasting, generating ideas, understanding problem-solving techniques, opportunity for group work, which I know you do a lot of here. Interestingly enough, complex problems really are solved best in group work. Simpler problems are solved best in individual work. Simpler problems in a group trip people up. They get to the answer better by themselves. More complex problems, they get to the better answer through collaboration. Open-ended. This is something that they'll get a lot in tests, the analogy, right? But that does trigger a lot of creative thinking and problem solving. Relationships. So asking them to find novel relationships is also part of problem solving and creativity. Identification of a novel relationship between seemingly unrelated items. And then external mediators, and the arts can be an external mediator, as we showed you in that picture before. So here's an example of one of my little lovely second grade teachers who decided to kind of use a different sort of way of testing and looking at what kids did. So this is the test that everybody gave kids, mid-chapter review. She was testing kids' ability to do certain geometry like perimeter area. But she decided to let kids be more creative and artistic. And so here she just gave them chart paper. And she said, now you're creating a farm, and you decide what you want on your farm and what animals you want, how big those animals might be, what features you might want on your farm, and then decide how big the pens need to be with the area. So this is something that's not new to any of you here, because you already do this. And then here's some other examples. The use of tableau. Do any of you teach the novel Hatchet here? Some of you do. Yeah, it's a survival. It's a story of survival. Boy gets caught in the wilderness in the Canadian Rockies through a plane crash and has to survive on his own for quite a while. And so the kids are showing through tableau how they would feel if they were in his situation. Now the teacher who did this unit, this first unit, this actually threads through both of the books that I wrote. It was one of the first units we did at Roland Park. The teacher always taught this very traditionally. And she was sort of toward the end of her career, but was very interested in the arts. So she decided to be one of our first teachers to embody arts integration. And so for this novel, it was all integrated through the arts, and this was just one of the activities that she did, was to have the kids really feel that character by doing, again, right here, you know, how would you feel? Show in your body how you feel. So that was just one of many activities that were arts integrated in that novel study. She gave the kids in that novel study the traditional tests she always had, both a test of kids writing and their character analysis, et cetera, the same things that traditionally are done. And then she compared the group that she did through arts integration through groups who had studied it in more traditional ways that she had taught for years. She was astounded at how the children really wrote the writing and how the writing improved, and the level of thinking and analysis having integrated the arts into the content versus using that same unit in previous years. And then here are kids that just, were using observational arts. They were studying Georgia O'Keeffe, Audubon, and then in their science class, applying what they had learned. So this is an instructional model that I'll end with. This is the brain-targeted teaching model. We use this as the instructional framework for arts integration. This model was created in my first book, 2004, and then again in 2012. It talks about the emotional climate for learning, how the physical environment plays a part in attention, how learning design and giving kids big picture concepts. This is really important. That icon right there, to me, means a lot. In education, traditional education, we often give kids learning objective by objective, and we expect that they kind of pull it together and understand it. In this model, the teachers design concept maps that really pull together all of that for kids up front. And I have to say that in this model, it's been out there for more than 10 years. Teachers who use concept maps to show kids what they're going to be learning and how they're going to be learning it has really changed instruction more than ever. This is teaching for mastery. That means, just before what I said earlier, kids have to know knowledge before they can apply it. Arts integration fits in here very well. Teaching for application is what we talked about with creativity, and that is you have to use knowledge meaningfully and apply it in creative ways to really know it. And then finally, evaluating learning, and that's evaluation not just for learning or of learning, but for learning. So how do the arts fit into this model? Okay, the arts evoke emotion, the arts add beauty. When you go into an arts integrated school like the lab school, it is significantly different. Probably all of you have been in schools that are more traditionally run, whether they are non-public or public schools. And in arts integrated schools, learning is visible. You see what children are learning because of the work that's displayed all over the place. When you go into a traditional school, guess what I see? I see 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper on a bulletin board with good work and a star. It's really palpable, the difference. I talked before about concept maps. Arts help learning become visible. And when I first started integrating arts into instruction and the students started to put the teachers would display what they were doing in the halls and develop concept maps to show what the kids were doing, it really started collaboration like I never expected across the school. An 8th grade teacher would come to a 3rd grade teacher and say, oh, I'm doing that on a different level, but maybe we can work together and my kids can come and tutor some of yours or work with some of your kids. Or parents would say, now I know what the kids are going to be learning in the next 3 weeks, or what they've just learned now. Applying knowledge, which is really the hallmark of creativity and learning, are obviously, without the arts, it's pretty hard to do that. And then finally, the artist portfolio is really the model for portfolio assessment that now has become the hallmark of not only K-12 education, but also education at the higher education levels. So what does an arts integrated school look like? As I've just said, the hallways become a showcase for student work. Instruction is improved through the use of the arts as a pedagogical tool, and we think our research is beginning to show that. Students can have multiple modes of expression. Teaching occurs in parallel processes, as we've seen across the school. And most importantly, learning is visible. So I think as a reflection, what I would leave you with is, what should educators know from the learning sciences about creativity? How do we teach it? How do we recognize it? And how do the arts support children who are creative thinkers and problem solvers? So I thank you so much for inviting me. This is the second book. There's a free reading and companion guide on the website, braintargetedteaching.org. So I would say you can get the book or just go to the website and just troll around and you'll see what the work we're doing at Johns Hopkins. There's 2 ways I'm going to answer that. First of all, we are dedicated to do more and more of these randomized control trials because the more results we can present that shows that kids not only don't lose but gain through the arts will help convince people that arts integration is important. But that's only the first step. The second step is how you do it and how you do it well. So I'm going to tell you a story. My first experience with arts integration was a big failure in my school. Here's what happened. A university came to me and said, oh, we're going to give you a full-time dance teacher. Our model is, our research is, that person is in your second grade classrooms. They're embedded full-time in second grade. So I had no choice. It was just like, this is what you do. And we sometimes do that now. On the other side, we do that to schools. Here's our study. This is how you have to do it. So I was like, oh, dance teacher, that's cool. Yeah, come on in. So that teacher spent the whole year with three second grade classes. And then when the test scores came back, those classes did worse in reading and math compared to how they did as first graders, and then compared to how every second grade class had ever done at the school. So I was a little perplexed about that. And I called the teachers in and I said, so what happened this year? And they said, well, we did a lot of dancing. And so then I looked at the booklet that they produced at the end of the year that showed what this project did. And I realized that there was only probably one activity out of all the activities that they did the bug dance. The kids were studying insects, and so they spent like a week developing a bug dance. Well, that didn't teach them anything. I mean, they had fun putting a bug dance together, but they didn't learn any content, right? So they were supposed to be learning something in that science class. Now, I did see something that was really good. They were using their bodies to show the clock, right? And so I thought, okay, that works, but 90% of this is just, they're just doing stuff to have fun, right? So I realized that it was my fault because I didn't understand arts integration. And because I didn't understand what it was, the teachers didn't understand. They thought, oh, good, dance teacher's here. Now we get to sit back and relax. Math time, go dance. Reading time, go dance. So the teachers didn't understand either. The dance teacher, she just wanted to dance, right? I mean, that was her thing. So what I realized from that was that arts integration isn't you just throw a teacher at teachers and say, just go figure it out, right? There has to be real training and there has to be real planning. So I didn't abandon it. The next year, we went into a different mode and it was very successful. And then after that, okay, I was convinced. I say all that to tell you that embedding the arts into content instruction is not about creating a pretty picture at the end of a unit. And it's not about what I just said, the art just taking over the content instruction, because then the kids aren't learning the content that they're there to learn. So it's embedding the two. How do you look at art standards? How do you look at math standards and reading standards and science standards and embed them both? So we're using our units. We developed 4 units: astronomy, ecology, life science, and what's the 4th? Astronomy. And we scripted everything out for the teachers, and we gave the teachers, in our study, we gave the teachers all the materials they would need, both science and arts integration, and we did tons of training for the teachers. And I think that's what's really important. You know, the teachers here obviously are highly trained, and, you know, in a lot of schools that I know that are arts integrated, the teachers are really highly trained. And that's when it's really good arts integration. But I have been in schools where they call themselves arts integrated, and all it is at the end of the class, a teacher hands kids some crayons and a piece of paper and says, now draw a rainbow. Well, what are they learning for the arts that way? You know, that's so. I think it really does take some sophistication that I did not, as a principal, understand in the beginning, and I paid for that lack of understanding. So I think it can either really, arts integration can step on what children are supposed to be learning in content areas, or enhance it tremendously, depending on the right training and the right leadership. So, I've talked to a lot of people. In fact, I will tell you, I just got back a couple days ago from Valencia, Spain, presenting some of our work to a neuroscience, arts, and creativity conference. And a lot of people who wanted to work with me are actually from museums. And that's the area where there's not really enough research. It's beginning to come as to how the museums can work with schools to enhance learning for kids. It's a really rich resource that is only begun to be explored and not really very well tested. So, you're on the cusp of something, I think, hopefully, that's going to proliferate. It needs to. I mean, there's just such rich resources. I don't know if I answered your question, but I talked a lot anyway. Good. Number one, the planning is critical, that planning time. So there are two things. The brain-targeted teaching model provides an instructional framework for everything a teacher does within a unit. So using that model has been successful in schools that I've worked with because they see arts integration as a part of the full instructional program. And they plan those units together collaboratively. When I say they, it's usually a grade level team, or if it's vertical grouping, a vertical grouping team. However, the arts educator has to be with them, unless somebody on that team is like really gung-ho and adept at arts integration. But I really feel, and that's why I'm really so passionate about, you can't do arts integration without arts education. You have to have the arts educator there who knows the standards and has been trained in the standards, because typically classroom teachers are not. And so it's that marriage of the knowledge of the content and the knowledge of the art standards that makes it work. Now, what I did in my school was that we had a schedule where collaborative planning was all set up. I actually had an arts integration specialist, so I put another position in the school, and she had non-teaching duties, so she was available to meet all day long with teachers all through the week to help them do that planning. So that takes a commitment and it takes funding, which I was able to do. And to the extent now we're partnering with a new school in Baltimore. That's not a new school. We have a new partnership with a school in Baltimore that is going to be a STEAM school. And that's part of what we're providing for them as part of the university's contribution. Yeah, so I think that's important. That planning time, the collaboration between the artists and the educators, really important. Yeah, I think probably as you go up in the grades, you find greater resistance. That said, not greater outcome. I mean, not any outcomes that are less. So another anecdote was that in the first group that I taught, the brain-targeted teaching model, they have to do an arts integrated unit using the model framework. And I remember an AP biology teacher who just shook her head and said, I don't know if I can do this. My kids need to learn all this stuff to pass the AP exam. So her first unit was a genetics unit. And she actually said that the kids learned more and did better in the AP exam than any other unit she ever taught that was traditional. So she went to be at first, she was my most resistant student in my class. And then she became such an advocate that she taught everything through arts integration. And then the whole science department in her high school all became STEAM, arts integrated. So yeah, that's the pushback is that. However, I would have to say at Johns Hopkins, there are some professors now that are starting to use the brain-targeted teaching model, which again means that they're integrating the arts, and they're loving it. So it's a little harder for people at the upper levels, but when they, go beyond their comfort zone, they often find that it's important. Yeah. I think research shows that At the younger grades, that happens probably pretty natural, but by around 3rd, 4th grade, teachers start to teach more traditionally, and creativity starts going out the window for kids. So, you know, my passion is how do you get that kind of wonderful creativity and move it all through our education system? We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So when we did our study, we found that some of the correlational studies showed that low SES populations and students at the lower end of reading achievement benefited more from arts integration than other groups. So we were interested in that, and then we're very, not surprised, but interested again that our studies sort of showed the same thing, that the kids at the lower level of achievement. So we started to wonder, in some of our work now, we have another proposal in to use our units one more time. They've been 3 times now revised based on feedback from teachers. We have a proposal into the U.S. Department of Ed to not only test memory, but creative thinking and problem solving. And so we decided to do it longitudinally because research also shows that arts integration has a greater impact when students have more exposure to it. So we're trying to do it over 2 to 3 years for students and measure that. And then we have a population in North Carolina and in Baltimore, so we can show it in different socioeconomic levels. So we hope to be able to move that study forward. But yeah, the correlation, again, nobody that we know is doing randomized controls like we are, but the correlational studies are showing advantages for low SES populations in particular. Now, part of that could be that in higher SES populations, kids are getting the arts anyway from their parents, right? Parents are maybe taking them to piano lessons, or they're doing art lessons, or they're exposed to museums, more than low SES. So low SES may be differentially benefiting because they don't get the opportunities that higher SES kids do. Well, it has been lovely being with you here tonight. Once again, Catherine, thank you for inviting me. I just love this school.